Hello and welcome to the 49ers First and 10 podcast, 10 minutes of the most up-to-date 49ers news first thing in the morning. I'm your host, Brianna McDonald. Joining me is 49ers team reporter, Lindsay Polares. We are just one day away from the 2024 NFL Draft, so today we are answering questions directly from the faithful. You guys texted us all of your burning questions, and we've got them pulled up here. Lindsay, are you ready for some draft talk?
Yeah, I don't think we've done a mailbag episode yet. So this is going to be a lot of fun and excited to talk about the draft.
All right, here's the first question. Zeke from Glendale, California asks, how likely is it that the 49ers will make a trade?
We are starting off, yeah, with a big one. I would never rule out a trade. It's always on the table. We heard John Lynch say on Monday that flexibility and preparation, that research on the prospects is everything in the draft because things change quickly and you kind of have to roll with the punches of what's happening in the moment. We've also heard Lynch and Shanahan regularly say over the course of just the regular season, the year, they like to take calls, they like to listen to their options in the draft. Will that necessarily always materialize into a trade? No, but we have seen that the history of the Niners, that they are willing to trade up, they're willing to trade back. We just saw last year that the 49ers traded up in order to secure safety Jair Brown with the 87th overall pick. So a trade has happened in recent history. That being said, I do think the 49ers draft position this year makes things all the more interesting. They are 31st overall as it stands right now. So they're the second to last pick of that first round. And a trade is totally going to depend on if other teams are really eager to trade back into the first round, and also what happens in the picks ahead of the 49ers, depending on who's on their draft board, which obviously we have no idea. They keep that very close to the chest and for good reason. But if someone, it's starting to, a lot of the top prospects that they're after coming off the board, that could motivate a move. So I would never ever rule out a trade. Is it a guarantee? I also would not say that. Lynch did say he expected calls to come in throughout the week during the draft. So, the phone lines are open. We'll see what happens. And actually, we don't have to wait that long because it's all going to start up in, I guess, a little over 24 hours. Okay, so Bree, time for your question. We got some good ones here. Nate from Daytona Beach, Florida asks, what is the 49ers strategy headed into the draft?
Strategy is a good question and also a hard one because the draft can be unpredictable and you honestly don't know what to expect, especially when you pick at the bottom of the first round. So the 49ers have to be prepared for everything. Lindsay, just like you mentioned, the team could have options for trading up, trading back, depending on what moves the teams ahead of them are making. There might just be a prospect on the board that the 49ers really like and want to make a move for, but honestly, we won't know until it happens. Overall, I think the team set themselves up pretty well heading into this draft, where there aren't any absolute needs that must be addressed and say, start in week one. The 49ers have a solid roster. They brought in a lot of depth during free agency, and now they have the luxury of using this draft to prime young players for future seasons. So, whether that's picking up a position of need or the best player available, likely a combination of those two, the 49ers want to draft someone who's able to contribute to the team and who's got that 49ers spirit. John Lynch outlined those traits as being a tough, dependable, fast, and a smart football player. So I think in this draft, the 49ers are really looking at their future, regardless of when exactly they make their pick. Now, Lindsay, I've got another question for you. Larkin from Norwell, Massachusetts asks, what do John and Kyle believe are the biggest needs to fill via the draft?
That's a great question. That's $1 million question. I can tell you what the national draft experts are saying. The three position groups that I've seen really consistently across mock drafts, pick predictions are offensive line, cornerback, wide receiver. But those draft experts are not the ones making the picks this weekend. What we did hear from John Lynch was that the important topic is that you're not always drafting for an immediate need, but potential needs in the next year, couple years, because one thing we know for sure, the 49ers roster will never stay the same. And that holds true for all the teams across the league. I think when you keep that in mind, cornerback is a potential place to look because Charvarius Ward, Diamador Lenore are both on the last year of their deals. You could look at offensive line, which you've got your starters returning from last year. That is set, but think about bringing in a young tackle or a swing offensive lineman that can learn from a first ballot Hall of Famer in Trent Williams. You could think about just adding depth to that wide receiver room. There's a lot of options. So while we don't know what John Lynch has necessarily specified as his specific biggest need, you can kind of inform yourself with the makeup of the current roster. I think one thing that the 49ers really did do well specifically for 2024 is that they made a lot of moves in free agency. So there's no glaring need on the roster right now. You can always add depth. You can always, strengthen a position group. But the 49ers have set themselves up in a really good spot headed into the draft where you're just infusing new talent and you're not looking for this like, oh my gosh, we have this position that we need to fill this weekend. So I think that's a really good place for the 49ers to be. So we'll see where they really just amp up the talent a little bit more this weekend. All right, Bree, I've got a question for you. Frank from Lawrenceville, Georgia asks, will the 49ers prioritize replacing Chase Young and Eric Armstead in the draft?
Yeah, this one's interesting because the defensive line got shuffled around during the offseason. And not only is Chase Young and Eric Armstead no longer on the team, but Sebastian Joseph Day, Cleveland Furl, and Javon Kinlaw also signed with other teams during free agency. So now there's room for a lot of new players on that front. But the 49ers really addressed their D line during free agency. They signed Leonard Floyd, they traded for Malik Collins, also signed players like Jordan Elliott and Yetur Gross-Matos and a few others. So there is some good depth along the defensive line now. But the faithful know their 49ers very well and how much the team loves a strong defensive line. There's never enough great players to stock up on either on the edge or as tackles. So to be completely honest with you, I would not be surprised if the 49ers drafted not even one, but a few defensive linemen since there's like 10 picks on the board. Maybe even with that first pick, who knows?
As it stands, 10 picks. I've got a lot of options of when to potentially get a defensive lineman. You're absolutely right.
All right. So the next question is coming from Thomas from Prince Frederick, Maryland. He asks, are the 49ers going to draft our greats' sons like Brandon Rice, Frank Gore's son, and T.O.'s son?
All right. Well, Thomas, let's not forget there is also a McCaffrey in this draft. So we've got the son of Jerry Rice, the son of Frank Gore, the son of Ed McCaffrey, and the son of T.O. in this draft. So, yes, like you mentioned, a lot of 49ers greats have the next generation. They're all in the same draft class, which honestly, super cool. And we saw Tariq Owens, son of Terrell Owens, come and work out during the 49ers local pro day. So I got to see one of them in action. So John Lynch was actually asked about this in his press conference on Monday. And one thing I thought that was really cool that he said was that he absolutely believes in NFL bloodlines. I think obviously these bloodlines hit really close to home because these are all, amazing players that have spent a considerable amount of time with the organization. They've left their mark on the history books. And, he even called out Tariq Owens having a similar stride as his father. He said he could see the similarities, and especially, like I said, because he got to see him firsthand on local pro day. That being said, Lynch did say that the draft is a lot about how they have evaluated, through an extensive process, each prospect. That's not to rule out any of the greats, but I think it depends on who gets picked, best available, where everyone falls in the draft. Obviously, the 49ers are open to it, depending on if it's the right move for the current needs of this roster. But yeah, there is some 49ers bloodlines that will likely continue in the NFL come this weekend. All right, Bree, next one for you. John from Bullhead City, Arizona. What are the odds of the 49ers draft an offensive lineman with their first pick?
Ooh, that first pick. That's the question of the hour. Well, let's see. If you want to make a safe bet, I think the direction you take is offensive line, just because that's what most of the experts are saying in their mock drafts. Lindsay, you know this pretty well because you've been covering them each week leading up to the draft. Almost everyone is pointing out a few different offensive linemen going at number 31. There have been some cornerbacks and wide receivers also in the conversation, but Lindsay, what have you seen?
Yeah, I think definitely it's an option. And I think it's not just an option, I think it's a very possible option. We heard John Lynch talk about this on Monday as well. This draft in particular has a lot of not just offensive tackles, but offensive linemen that have that versatility to play both at guard and the tackle position. That's a really great thing to have. I think that's one thing that was really attractive about a guy like John Feliciano that has played, center and guard. Versatility on the offensive line is a huge thing. Obviously, John Feliciano is a veteran in this league, but if you can draft a young player that can play up and down the line, yes, that's always a good thing. And there happens to be a good amount of those in this draft. So certainly a position to keep an eye on.
All right, faithful. Well, that will do it for this episode. If you'd like to send us any question you have, we are happy to answer them. So text first and 10 to 408-715-4949. Again, that's the number 1ST ampersand 10 to 408-715-4949 to submit your questions. We'll have all the details written out for you on 49ers.com. But thank you, Lindsay, for joining me in this update. Thank you to the faithful for sending in your questions. Don't forget to follow First and 10 on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Turn on the notifications so you're in the know when we post any breaking news updates. And thank you for tuning in.